Aloha. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Let's give yourselves a round of applause. It's a little rainy out there, nothing you're not used to though.
Aloha, my name is Kalia, and I'm here to, I really like Tulsi, I like what she's been doing. I have a sister who's in prison in Illinois for marijuana, and I'm very interested in the fact that she's trying to decriminalize marijuana. My sister has made me very aware of how many people are in prison in America for marijuana, and I feel like it's just such a waste of money for everybody and such a waste of time, and our prison systems are horrific. And we need to change them, and we need to get people out of jail who aren't doing things that hurt anybody. So I'm very much in support of decriminalization for marijuana.
Hi, I'm Alexa. I'm from Hawaiian Paradise Park, Punamakai, and I got inspired by Tulsi Gabbard to step up and see what's happening, see where I can help. To make this a better place. I'm concerned about medical care, health care in general for senior citizens, for people who are disabled, for people who do not get medical insurance through their employer. I grew up in Eastern Europe, or Central Europe rather, and I feel that we were all taken care of, and it was during communist government. So I would like to see what America can do. Thank you.
I'm QB Maddox. I'm from Michigan originally. Worked for the United Auto Workers as a servicing rep. Moved here to Hawaii 10 years ago. Been out of politics for over 20 years, and Tulsi got me back involved. I mean, she's representing the people, and that's what I like.
Get inspired.
The fact that she went to Syria and interviewed those people and got the facts when all the rest of the congressmen are cowards to get in there. So I'm thinking like, you know what, I need to get back involved. So I'm here to support her 100%.
I gotta tell you, it's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful to be home. It's great to be here in Hilo. This is number 5. Is that right? Number 5 in our statewide Aloha Town Hall tour. As Daryl mentioned, there are 2 major committees that I serve on, Foreign Affairs and Armed Services. So much of the committee work that I do is within those 2 jurisdictions. But of course, through the legislative work that we do, through the appropriations and funding work that we do, we touch and focus on all of the variety of issues that you may be interested in, whether it be healthcare, education, infrastructure, you can go environment, you can go on down the list. I want to spend as much time as possible on questions, so I'm going to try to keep this intro brief. But there's one issue that's been in the news quite a bit lately that I wanted to just bring up front, and that is the issue of North Korea. And what has been happening there. As Daryl mentioned, I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Asia Pacific Subcommittee, as well as the Middle East Subcommittee. And this has been an issue that I focused on quite a bit, actually, ever since I was elected and sworn in as a member of Congress back in January of 2013. Even then, I had recognized the increasing threat and capabilities coming from North Korea. And yes, the threat that poses to the United States overall, but more specifically the threat that poses to us here in Hawaii, given we are the most forward point for our country in the Pacific. We are the closest in proximity to North Korea. What was quite astounding to me on one of the first official congressional trips that I took with other members of Congress to the Asia Pacific region was how few members of Congress are aware of how large the Pacific Ocean is. They kept commenting in the plane, are we there yet? Are we there yet? So it was important for them. They stopped here in Hawaii and got a sense of, a short time, but got a sense of Hawaii and where we are. But they also, prior to this trip, were not even aware that North Korea was a nuclear-armed country. Disturbing, to say the least. Senior members of Congress who were traveling on this trip did not know that North Korea was nuclear armed. They were not aware that North Korea has developed over the years intercontinental ballistic missile capabilities that put Hawaii directly within range of those capabilities, and that those threats have directly been made. So from that point and continuing on, especially now, I've been very focused on, both through the Foreign Affairs and Armed Services Committees, raising this level of awareness and pushing for defense of Hawaii in particular. Given North Korea's most recent actions, most recent escalation, I'm urging my colleagues, our Hawaii delegation, our leadership here in the state of Hawaii, and urging all of you to help raise voices as we try to get urgent action to make sure that the appropriate capabilities are in place for the defense and protection of Hawaii in particular. This is something that we can't afford to take lightly. There are a number of other issues that I've got all my notes scribbled out here, but I wanted to open with that one because it's one that I've gotten a number of questions on, and one that specifically falls within my committee jurisdiction, to give you a quick update on that. But from here, Daryl, mahalo for your moderating this evening, and we can kick off the questions.
Writing. Why did you go see President Trump, and what did you speak about?
Glad we're starting with a good question. Shortly after the general election in November of last year, I was invited to go and meet with then President-elect Trump, specifically to talk about an issue that I have been very focused on for years now, which is Syria. Ending the counterproductive regime change war in Syria that Congress and you, the American people, have not authorized or declared. And to talk about some of the dangers of proposals that were being put forward at the time, and unfortunately that are resurfacing now with regards to what are the costs to our country, to our military, to our taxpayer dollars of something called a so-called no-fly zone or safe zone, as well as what are the consequences of these actions, both intended and unintended consequences, specifically within Syria. Much of our conversation focused around Syria. We also talked about terrorist threats coming from groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other issues within the Middle East. My goal in that meeting was to try to provide some influence and some insight on my strong views on these issues and why they're so important for us here at home, in the hopes of basically trying to get to him before the neocon war hawks who were beating their war drums were able to exercise their influence over him. Unfortunately, as we've seen over the last 10 days or so, I think they were successful. I've been very outspoken in criticizing and calling out his missile strike against Syria as being reckless and careless and an escalation of this regime change war in Syria, and one that Congress has not authorized. You know, when people ask me sometimes, Tulsi, why are you focused on Syria, and why is that important to us here at home? When we have challenges here in our community, why should I care about what's happening over there? And I remind folks about the cost of these wars and the consequences of our policies. That when you look at our country's regime change wars, whether it was Iraq, Libya, or now in Syria, and the trillions of dollars, your dollars, that have been spent on these wars, there is a direct connection between where those dollars have been spent and the difficulty and lack of resources that we have here at home to fund things like our public schools, to take care of our infrastructure, to help protect our environment, to help improve our healthcare system, to take care of folks who are living on the streets and without homes, to deal with so many of the challenges that we have here at home. You cannot separate these two issues, which is one of the reasons I've been fighting against these regime change wars. wars that have cost hundreds of thousands of people their lives, wars that have created millions of refugees, and wars that have ultimately resulted in strengthening terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, counterproductive to our national security interests, what to speak of the American lives that have been lost. So for so many reasons, it's critical for each of us to understand the connection, to understand that we cannot afford to be the world's police. That even with the best of intentions, our actions have so often, again, Iraq, Libya, and Syria, our actions have resulted in more human suffering, not less. Our actions have resulted in more destruction, not less. And this is why it's important for us to stand up now, especially at a time when people in both political parties and when people in the media are applauding this president for launching this illegal attack against Syria. This is when our voices are critical to stand up and say no. This is where the power base lies in your voices, and I ask you to stand with me in making sure that we don't turn a blind eye to this illegal escalation.
Yeah, I'm Kim Putnam, and I appreciate your stand on this. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, "That's bad form. That's a no-no." And when we, without a declaration of war, attack another nation, unilaterally on the basis of the president saying attack, we have lost all respect in an international community by doing that act, just the same as Japan, because their diplomats were late, lost the respect and were declared an act of infamy. Well, that was an act of infamy also, a unilateral act without consent of Congress. And I appreciate your stand. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. There's a reason why we have a constitution. There's a reason why we have the balance of powers in our government. There is a reason why this War Powers Act exists, and we must, in Congress, take back our authority and responsibility on behalf of you to not allow any president to conduct these illegal wars unchecked. Thank you.
The next question from the floor is from Danny Lee. Danny, would you mind raising your hand? And as we make our way to Danny, I'll read one of the questions that was submitted. Aloha, I have a sister who is doing 8 years for marijuana in a horrible prison in Illinois. What is the decriminalization process looking like in Congress, and what is the likelihood of this happening anytime soon?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, and I'm very sorry to hear about your sister and what she's going through, and frankly, what too many people are going through in this state and across this country. You know, I recently read an FBI report that came out a few years ago saying that every 42 seconds in this country, someone is arrested for the use or possession of marijuana. Every 42 seconds. So if we think about how long we're just sitting here tonight, think about the human, social cost and toll that is taking on our communities. I've introduced legislation. It's a bill, H.R. 1227. It's a bipartisan bill that I've introduced with a Republican from Virginia. He's actually a very conservative Republican named Tom Garrett. He is an Army veteran and a former prosecutor, but he believes strongly, as I do, that marijuana has no place on the Schedule I list of the Federally Controlled Substances Act. And when you really look at this issue, it makes no sense that you have marijuana, a substance that has been proven time and again to be far less dangerous than alcohol, treated at the federal level at the same way that heroin is treated. You have families being torn apart because of this, people being thrown in jail, their lives being ruined with creating a criminal record. And for what? To what end? It makes absolutely no sense. What to speak of here in Hawaii, and I think it's 26 other states who have legalized in some form or another medical marijuana. 28? Thank you. It's 28. Very helpful. Who have legalized in some form medical marijuana, but who are facing this contradiction between state and federal law, where, I've got local bankers here in Hawaii coming and talking to me, local insurers who provide workman's comp insurance in a quandary about what to do because these are federally regulated industries. And they are literally afraid that if they do business directly with any of our dispensaries, or indirectly maybe with people who work there, that they or their employees will be subject to prosecution by the federal government. So they're trying to figure out how to deal with this contradiction between the two. What to speak of recent statistics that have come out showing that states who have legalized medical marijuana, there has been up to 30% reduction in opioid-related deaths in those states. And for every year those states have legalized medical marijuana, fewer and fewer opioid-related deaths occur. So on so many different levels, what to speak of the fiscal impact, when you think about our criminal justice system here in Hawaii, which is the same across the country. If you read the papers every year as the legislative session goes in, there's usually calls for more funding to build new prisons here, new calls for funding to rebuild dilapidated prisons that we have that are very overcrowded. I went and visited a few of them last month when I was here in Hawaii and had a chance to talk with some of the inmates. And I tell you, I talked to a young girl on Maui who was in prison there, and she shared, I don't know anybody. I don't know a single person, she said, who does not use drugs. And she told her story of how she ended up in our criminal justice system for the use of drugs. So our current laws are hurting people, not helping people. They're hurting our community, not helping and strengthening our community. And this is an issue where we already have found bipartisan support to be able to change this through passing common sense legislation. And we are urging more and more members of Congress to sign on to it. Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.
First of all, I want to congratulate you on taking that very tough stand on Syria. I think sometimes it's actually harder to take, as a soldier, it's harder to take, to disobey an illegal order. And I think that you did the right thing. I absolutely agree with you 100% on that.
Thank you, Danny.
The ultimate culprit, as you already started to mention, is that this country, the war establishment in Washington, has been fixated on regime change. In other words, going to other countries and changing their government. And in fact, may I remind everybody, the first regime change started in 1893, right here in Hawaii. So my question is, how do we educate and mobilize more people? Because most of the people still, especially on the continent, do not realize that the American empire is fixated on regime change. If they understand that, I think they'll understand this is not Department of Defense, it's a Department of Offense.
Thank you, Danny. Your question is exactly on point. How do you educate people? Because too many people are not aware of what our country's policies have been or the consequences of those policies. I think a lot of people have good intentions and they want to be in a position where they can help people. And they see people suffering in another part of the world and they say, gosh, we want to relieve their suffering. We want to take action to be able to help them. But unfortunately, too often leaders in our country take that action through regime change wars that, as I mentioned earlier, end up hurting and increasing these people's suffering rather than actually relieving it. So education is key. Holding leaders who are continuously pushing our country into these regime change wars accountable is key. You know, this was one of the frustrations that I had during the presidential election last year, is that no one in the media was asking and holding accountable people who were running to be our commander-in-chief in either party. They were not being asked this question specifically. They were not being asked directly their position, what actions they would take. Would they continue and escalate the regime change war in Syria, or would they put an end to it so that the people of Syria could find their way back to stability and peace? So this accountability and this education needs to come from all sectors, and every single one of you has an opportunity to help educate others. And this is critical. I can't overstate this enough. This is something that I'm trying to continue to do with my colleagues in Congress, who are very quick to call for military action, very quick to call for regime change wars. And these people need to be held accountable for their positions and need to be educated about why it is not good for the people in these countries, as history has proven, and why it is counterproductive to our interests here in the United States as well. You only have to remind people again about the cost. What is the cost of these wars? There are so many needs that our communities have here. We need to focus on investing and rebuilding our communities here at home, not starting more regime change wars in other parts of the world.
Okay, our next question from the floor is from Carrie Sullivan. Carrie, could you raise your hand? And as we get the mic to Carrie, what can Hawaii expect from a future without the EPA?
Oh. The question was, what kind of future can Hawaii expect without the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency? I'm quite concerned about the deep cuts that the president has proposed in his budget to the EPA. What to speak of the leadership that has been selected to run the EPA, someone who appears to be diametrically opposed to the mission of the EPA. We're going to be fighting this fight in Congress. As Congress goes through the budget process and goes through the appropriations process, we've got our work cut out for us to be able to continue to advocate for important and basic environmental protections, as well as doing our best to make sure that the protections that exist are not eroded. But there's a lot that needs to be done here locally as well, frankly. And a few states have started down this path where, you know, as you know, the federal law, the federal government sets the baseline standard. So the federal law is here, states and counties can't go below it, but you can strengthen it. So I think there's something that we should discuss and talk about and figure out here in Hawaii, where protecting our environment is not just a theoretical thing, like, oh, okay, of course we should protect our environment. It's a way of life here. It is part of our culture. It is part of our home. It is part of our family. So we need to look at state laws, we need to look at county ordinance, we need to look within our community, at each other, nonprofits, to see what actions can we take that whatever happens nationally, that we make sure that our precious resources are protected here, our land, our water, our precious drinking water. We have to try as much as possible to be proactive in this area. Thank you.
Hello,
Aloha.
Congresswoman. My question is with Congress voting for a declaration of war to take us into war, then why can't they vote to take us out? I mean, where does it end, like with Iraq and Afghanistan, and now we're moving on to Syria? I mean, what's the final point where, you know, funding and troops actually stop? Why is there not a bill to allow Congress to take us out of war And at least with a roll call, we'll know when it comes election time who was and wasn't against war at what time, if that roll call continues on.
Yeah, thank you. This goes to the heart of the issue, is that Congress has not voted or authorized this war in Syria. This war has actually been waged for much longer than you might think. This war against Syria did not begin with President Trump's missile strike a few days ago. It began years before that, when our government, your taxpayer dollars, began being used to provide arms, weapons, salaries, intelligence assistance to armed militants within Syria who are working directly with and often under the command of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda to overthrow the Syrian government. We provided this support indirectly through countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar, who for their own interests wanted to see the Syrian government overthrown and who were providing support to these terrorist groups working towards that end as well. So this illegal regime change war has been waged for years, and Trump's missile strike really was an escalation of this illegal war that was never debated on the House floor, that you never had a say in, and that was never voted on so that you could hold your leaders accountable for it. Part of the problem here is that over the years, Congress has ceded its authority because too many people to the executive branch, because too many people are afraid of being on the record. They don't want to be held accountable. So I've introduced legislation to deal with the issue that I've just talked about, that the CIA has been waging this war by providing this support directly to armed militants working with terrorist groups. My bill is called the Stop Arming Terrorists Act. And very simply, it would prohibit your taxpayer dollars from being used to provide these armed militant groups who are working with terrorist groups with any type of assistance. And it would also stop your taxpayer dollars from being funneled through countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey and others who are supporting these same groups, all in this effort to conduct this regime change war for their own interests that are counterproductive to ours. So I agree with you, Congress needs a vote. If the president wants to take our country into war, then Congress needs to exercise its authority in having that debate and representing your voices and having a vote. Thank you.
Okay, our next question from the floor is from Christine Mingo. Christine, could you raise your hand, please? As they get the mic to you, next question submitted written. Why did you meet with Assad and what was discussed?
The people of Syria are suffering in ways that you can't even imagine. I met with teenagers, young women, young men who have personally been tortured, been raped, watched family members killed before their very eyes, all by these different terrorist groups who are continuing this regime change war. People are suffering as a result of the sanctions. I met small business owners, these women who've been best friends since high school, who are now in their 50s, who had a thriving business, sewing and making garments, employed a lot of people. Their business was completely destroyed because of this war, and now they've started to try to pick back up the pieces, but can't because of the sanctions regimes that are in place. There is such devastation that has come about as a result of this, and I met with Assad to try to further the cause of understanding and peace. And when it comes right down to it, we cannot further the cause of peace and understanding without meeting people who we disagree with, even if they may be our adversaries. We can't just meet with our friends and think that that is going to bring about peace magically somehow. The people of Syria are not interested in politics. They're not interested in these debates that we see between talking heads on TV every day. They're interested in life and peace and a future for their kids and their families. That's all they're asking for. They're asking us to stay out of it, to stop fueling this regime change war, and let the Syrian people determine the future of Syria for themselves.
In 1973, we had Senate hearings because the Nixon administration had broken into Democratic headquarters. And I looked it up and I realized you weren't even alive then. And I think a lot of your colleagues weren't alive at that time. So I want to say a little bit in the build-up on this, but my basic question is going to be to you after this, is what are you doing to study and prepare yourself for possible impeachment hearings? Because it happens in the House of Representatives, and you're becoming brave. You're obviously a very brave person, and therefore you can be a leader. Even though you're not on one of the intelligence committees, we need someone like you. But, you know, this really has been getting to me since we learned Attorney General Sessions basically lied when he denied that he had met with Russians during the campaign. And then a few weeks later, we learned in February that he admitted, oh yeah, that's right, I remember now. I met with the Russians twice, but it was only in my Senate office. And then about 10 days later, he said, oh yeah, I forgot. I actually did meet with the Russian ambassador, but it was at the Republican convention, and then it was at my Senate office. And oh, by the way, the Trump administration paid for my plane ticket to go to the Republican convention. And then we learned that not only did he meet with the Russian ambassador for the Trump campaign, but also that along with him were Manafort and Flynn and Carter Page and Trump's son-in-law. You know, and on it goes. All this evidence is piling up that there was collusion because they got it taken out of the platform for the Republican convention that there would be sanctions on Russia regarding their invasion of Ukraine. I could go on. The evidence is just, you know, really a mountain high at this point. So I am praying that this man gets out of office soon. He's driving us all crazy. And I'm just wondering what you're doing to talk with your colleagues and do your homework on how you're going to go about impeachment, because I feel very strongly in my heart that it needs to happen and it's going to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, you've raised a few critical issues here that I want to talk about. You know, the investigations that are occurring right now in the House Intelligence Committee as well as the Senate Intelligence Committee. The House Intelligence Committee has unfortunately fallen apart because of a whole variety of reasons that we don't need to repeat here. I called for Congressman Nunes's recusal from that. I think he compromised himself. So far, the Senate committee appears to be taking this with the seriousness that it deserves in a bipartisan fashion, which is what's necessary for this investigation to continue and actually come out with a credible outcome. I called for Jeff Sessions' recusal from consideration for nomination because of the fact that he did not disclose the truth during his nomination hearings. These are the kinds of things that not only increase frustration, but cast doubt in people's minds about the integrity of our government. And that's why transparency and accountability are so important. On the issue of impeachment, I am doing my homework. I am studying more about the impeachment process. I will just say, I understand the calls for impeachment, but what I am being cautious about and what I give you food for thought about is that if President Trump is impeached, the problems don't go away. Because then you have a Vice President Pence who becomes President Pence. And if you do your research on his positions on many of the issues we've talked about and many of the issues that I get phone calls about from people all across the state, the issue of war and peace, he's about as hawkish as they come. Issues relating to the environment, education, healthcare. I disagree with so many of the positions that he has. And in some ways, given the fact that he's a former member of Congress and very well connected within the Republican establishment in Washington, he'd be able to, I believe, be far more effective in furthering his agenda than we have seen so far in President Trump's first 100 days. So we've got our work cut out for us on these different issues, and we've just got to continue going forward. It's not these things are never simple, I guess is my point. Thank you.
Our next question is going to be from Travis Rogers. Travis, could you raise your hand? And we'll get the mic coming to you. In the meantime, I'll read the next question. And again, in the interest of time, we've got less than an hour to go. If I could respectfully ask that try to limit to your question just so we can get to more of them and as many of them as possible. So given the direction of the Trump administration's push to defund women's health services, reproductive services provided by Planned Parenthood, how will Hawaii prepare for and fund these budget shortfalls? And what are you actively doing to protect women's reproductive rights?
Thank you. Yeah, healthcare has been, up until the very last day we left to come back to our districts, was really at the forefront of everything that was happening in Washington. I voted against the bill that came before the House that allowed states to defund Planned Parenthood and others who are providing critical health services to women in our communities. Unfortunately, the Senate passed this bill and the President signed it into law just a few days ago. The American Health Care Act that the Republicans have put forward as their replacement for Obamacare is terrible. It is a terrible bill that undermines health care for our community rather than providing health care for our community. Like we see too often in these health care bills, the influence of the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies was very clear, where you've got a health care bill that gives $600 billion in tax cuts and giveaways to these corporations while saying, hey, for our kupuna and our seniors, insurance companies, you can charge them up to 5 times more than young, healthy people. How does that help those who need care? It doesn't. By cutting hundreds of millions of people's access to care by cuts to Medicaid, you're taking away care from those who most need it and who can least afford it themselves. I've supported and signed on to the Medicare for All bill, HR 676. For a few simple reasons. When you look at these bills, and you know, the Affordable Care Act did some good, but there was also this signature from the insurance companies that existed in it, and the pharmaceutical companies, where still, as we speak, Medicare is not allowed to negotiate directly with pharmaceutical companies to bring down the cost of prescription drugs for Medicare recipients. They're not allowed to. The VA is. The VA can negotiate those prices down to provide those benefits and reduce costs to veterans, but Medicare cannot. I've signed legislation that would do that would allow Medicare to negotiate those prices. I've signed on to legislation that would allow us to import pharmaceutical drugs from Canada, where they are offered at a fraction of the price that we are charged here at home. And I mention each of these because our healthcare system is broken. Our healthcare system needs true systemic, real changes so that we have a system that actually supports providing care to people. Access to care, not just access to insurance. It's an important difference. And that's been one of the most heartbreaking things that I've seen over the last few years is people who say, okay, great, I've got health insurance now, but then when they need it the most, they go to the doctor and realize, hey, I've got a $10,000 deductible. I can't afford that. I mean, this is something that impacts people's health, well-being, and life and death. And our country's got to get serious about doing something real to fix it and change it, not make it worse. And that's unfortunately what the Republican bill that's being put forward does.